Hello and welcome or welcome back to my channel. My name is Judy and I enjoy travel, history, and finding out how people live. I grew up on a farm in central Indiana, one which was too small to make it on its own, so I've always been curious about how other people manage to do this. If you can't expand your land holdings, your only choice is to develop a second income stream. That might come from taking an outside job, but in my experience, farming is hard work and mostly full-time. You could also develop a second income stream based on the farm itself. In Sicily, agriturismo is a partial response to this problem. The word refers to a farm that takes in guests either in rooms or at a restaurant, sometimes both. Occasionally, the package might extend to teaching about how to farm. Farms tend to be mostly off the beaten track, accessible only to tourists with a car. I do not choose to drive in Europe, so my only option to visit one of these establishments was to sign up for a tour. I won the lottery on this one. The group was supposed to include 4 others beside the guide and me, but the other 4 bailed, so I had the day to myself. Let's explore the wonders of the Sanacore Farm, a farm-to-table establishment here in northern Sicily on the Armchair Traveler. This is the site of the Agriturismo Sanacore estate and farmhouse, courtesy of Google Earth. The image was taken in June of 2023. The main product is olives, but the substantial olive groves are just out of frame in this photograph. The detail on the right shows you the pavement in the courtyard, which isn't visible in the Google Earth view. The current owners are researching the history of the building and the farm itself, in addition to building a successful hotel restaurant, promoting the facility as a wedding venue, and marketing their olive oil internationally. My military historian husband tells me the shape of the enclosure suggests that the site might once have been a Roman Empire-era military outpost. The farmhouse sits on a small rise, about 310 feet or so above sea level, and would have had a good view of the seacoast. The nearest approach is only 5 miles away. Roman military engineers built things to last. Even if the walls had tumbled down, the foundations would still have been more than strong enough to take the weight of newer buildings. Those engineers had to design using their heads, not a computer, so they weren't capable of cutting corners. The family has yet to discover whether the Romans were ever here, but it has discovered what it believes to be Arab wells, which could not have been dug much later than the 11th century. The Norman connection makes a lot of sense. The nearest big city here is called Trapani. It's about 10 miles away, and it was conquered by Roger I in 1077. The tower you see in the image probably dates to the 12th century and is clearly Norman in style. The tower has been rebuilt by the family and now houses guest quarters. There's no elevator, of course, but the lower level guest room is fitted out to be handicapped accessible. This is the main public entryway to the estate, with sturdy walls, a gateway, and a tower that you can see. It's located a little more than 1.25 miles from the main drag, where there are at least a half a dozen competing bread and breakfast type hotels. There's also a competing agriturismo just to the south. I grew up on a small family farm, too small to make a living, and when my father purchased it in the 1950s, never intended to. He was a veterinarian, a large animal specialist, and this was his hobby farm. It gave us a home, a site for a small animal hospital with 9 kennels that he rather reluctantly put in at my mother's insistence. I can still hear her words in my memory. "Cats and dogs, honey, that's where the money is." That diversification was meant to present another income stream. This farm is doing the same thing, but along a number of different lines. Their base was the olive groves. They produce and now export quality olive oil. They grow the olives, produce the oil, and bottle it on site. The bed and breakfast operation and the restaurant are going concerns. The restaurant specializes in Sicilian cuisine, featuring organically grown products including chickpeas, vegetables, grains, and snails, which I must have missed. They also produce wine grapes, and I'll talk about the wine in just a minute. Sanacore exports organic olive oil, which it was promoting heavily in Japan and Canada when I visited. Part of the enthusiasm for this product is that it is organic. There are procedures for converting to and acquiring an organic certificate in the United States, and I've been told that the EU requirements, Italy is a member and follows EU health and safety standards, are probably quite a bit tougher than ours. I can't speak to the Sicilian economics on this, but I can tell you a little bit in the United States. At home, farmers have to stock fertilizers, herbicides, fungicides, and pesticides for 3 years before they can even apply for the certificate. This is not a decision an American grower would undertake lightly. American farmers rely heavily on these inputs. Without them, yields go down significantly. In many cases, the improved prices that the farmer might get at the end of those 3 years won't come close to offsetting the lost income while it was happening. For farmers to derive benefits from organic farming methods, however, consumers need to trust that the rules on organic production are actually being followed. Internationally, customers seem to trust those EU certificates and seem willing to pay the higher prices associated with them. What might seem like a far too large restaurant for a weekday lunch stop is more than large enough to serve as a meeting and wedding venue when the weather isn't good enough to stay outside in the courtyard. This one comes complete with a wooden ceiling and what I think must be a projector. My day trip was marked by drizzle separated with intermittent floods and a chilly wind. The welcome I received here was enthusiastic and quite warm. When I visited, it was still early days for the lunch trade, but the owner, who took time to talk to me when he could have been worrying over a stack of bills or fussing at his farm workers, had a great deal to tell me. The restaurant is at ground level, so I didn't have the advantage of height, but I believe that gray blob you see in the background, near the center, is one of the Agatti Islands, located just off the coast. I was greeted by a table for two. This was in early April on a Saturday, really too early for the tourist season, so as I recall, there were no other guests. The table was set with bread, some water, and a pitcher of wine. I believe the chef sources at least some of the wheat from local producers and then makes his own bread, much of which was consumed in the olive oil tasting to come. Let's sample the goods with a little bit of Vivaldi in the background. Lunch was billed as an olive oil tasting, but it was far more than that. I used to be a vegetable oil specialist at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, but olive oil was never a part of my beat. I knew a few things, such as the fact that most of what's sold in America isn't the best quality, and that the good stuff is cold-pressed. I learned far more through the tasting, including the owner's ambitious plan to expand his exports. This will never be a mass-market product. The farm is simply too small. However, it can be a profitable niche product. Here's your friendly blogger with a sample of the goods. Sadly, the market for this oil doesn't extend to Virginia, so I ended up bringing home a bottle of the lemon-scented oil with me. Here's a better look at the 2 bottles of olive oil. This is the olive oil the farm uses in its restaurant, markets locally, and exports internationally. I like olive oil, and I found this variety to be just excellent. Wine was on the menu, and they produce it themselves. I didn't see a wine list, but I've been told they offer different labels from local wineries, as well as a Resolute Red and a White, which I didn't sample. They are produced from grapes grown here on the estate. As far as I can remember, it isn't marketed commercially, or at least it wasn't during my visit. I haven't spoken much or written in my regular blog about Sicilian wines, which, with just a few exceptions, aren't much found in American markets. Perhaps the most famous Sicilian red is called Nero d'Avola, produced from a variety of grapes going by the same name. It's more like an Australian Shiraz than anything else, but can be a little harsh on the tongue, and meant to accompany a meal heavy on the garlic and spices rather than for gentle sipping. Greek settlers brought grapevines to the southeastern part of the island and planted them in the area around Avila, which is how they got their name, about 10 miles southwest of Syracuse. The vines apparently found the local soil and climate congenial, and cultivation spread all over the island. Doubtless the Greek settlers produced some variety of beverage from those grapes, but the earliest records of it only date back to the 15th century. Sicilians also plant a separate variety called Grillo, a white grape that is widely planted all over Sicily and which was originally used to make mostly Marsala. It went out of style for a while, but is now being revived and blended into a white table wine. I'm told it resembles a Pinot Grigio. This would be an expensive and potentially risky thing to try in America. where I've read that someone trying to start a vineyard might have to drop between $20,000 and $100,000 an acre just to plant the grapes. Under the right circumstances, if all goes well, 1 acre of America might produce around 4 tons of grapes that could yield 640 gallons of wine, which amounts to a little over 3,000 bottles. My guess is that our farmer proprietor sells his grapes to a local winery to be blended into the final product, at least for now. There is one potentially significant item that may or may not help the farmer in this particular equation, and that is global climate. I'm not a climatologist, just an avid gardener, but I can promise you that I can grow things in my garden, mostly ornamentals, that I would never have contemplated planting 50 years ago. And I can't grow things that I did plant 50 years ago. What I cannot predict is how this might play out on an island in the middle of the Mediterranean Sea. Farmers work really hard, so lunch on a farm is always a far more substantial meal than dinner or supper. A farm-based restaurant would provide the same choices perhaps at either meal, but in my experience what we consumed here was more like an old-fashioned farm lunch than a supper. After the olive oil tasting, we dug into the antipasti, shown here. On the top left is a double feature, deep fat fried chickpea bread. It's based on organic ground chickpeas grown on the farm, and it reminded me a little bit of fried polenta. Those round objects are arancini, which are Sicilian specialty. They're cooked rice stuffed with cheese, breaded, and then deep fat fried. My husband calls them heart attack on a dish. On the bottom left, you can see homemade sausage, which I think was purchased from a nearby farm since I didn't see any animals, and cheese, as well as grilled tomato toast in the background. On the right is a bowl of stuffed olives and a sauce, which we didn't even try. There was just too much food. Although there was a modest beef dish shown on the edge of the top right photo, the more interesting thing was the pasta. There are hundreds of different shapes of pasta, many of them only found locally. Bucciati is a type of long macaroni, originally developed here in Trapani province, but now found all over Sicily. There are 2 ways to make it. A flat, narrow, long-cut noodle can be wrapped around the stem of a local plant called rope glass, or more commonly coiled vertically around a long pin like a knitting needle. Either way, as far as I can tell, they can only be made by hand. The wheat is sourced locally, and I was told it is organic. The bucciati are traditionally served with a sauce made out of pesto, garlic, and tomatoes, ground olives, all mixed up with olive oil. Thank you for joining me today to learn a bit about expanding opportunities for farmers and how they approach acquiring different income streams in Sicily through the agriturismo scheme. We explored the many options being tried by the Sanacor family. I hope you enjoyed the visit and the lunch. Come back next time for a new adventure with me here on The Armchair Traveler.